Hello, everybody. Thank you for your participation at this webinar on greening the Commission and greening my NA. The SALTO Green is glad to host this webinar as it will answer some needs of the agencies on how to implement the green transition in national agencies process. Today, we are welcoming Michael ROURKE, Program Officer implementing the EMAS system for the Commission and coordinating EMAS data and environmental statement. Our second panelist is Celso Martinez, EMAS Management Representative at the Commission. The presentation will last about 1 hour and it will be registered, and then we will have a short Q&A session right after. I now give the floor to EMAS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to make this presentation. As it said, we are a team managing the EMAS at the Commission. The EMAS is the management, the environmental management system from the European regulation we implement in-house. We are a team of 5 persons. Today we have with us also Michael ROURKE, which is managing the EMAS for the Commission, and in particular, he's very specialized in data and the publication of the environmental statement, between others, because in fact in the EMAS there are plenty of activities we share one with the other. Today, I don't know if Elisabetta and Sofia will join because there is an ongoing training at the same time. So I would like to go into the policy context because it's a very important stone of our building, and it is the communication we call greening the Commission. Then we will explain a little bit the role of the EMAS as a management system, and to go through some achievements. I have more slides than the things I will explain, but that's for you for your use. And then I will go through what we imagine to be the role for managers in greening the Commission. But I think that this could be of interest also for you as managers who would like to green your own activities. The start point of this presentation is about the Voilà. The start point is the speech of Mrs. von der Leyen. Probably you remind in 2019 when she said that we will become the first climate neutral continent, and was the launch of the Green Deal, and very, very strong, ambitious project and ambitious target for the whole continent. And in addition, she said that we, as the Commission, we will reduce our environmental impact and to become climate neutral by 2030, which means 20 years before the target for the Union. It's quite challenging for us. When you see the slides, and when you will receive the slides under climate neutral by 2030, you will find a link to the webpage in which you will find all the documentation relating to the climate neutrality of the Commission. So, but what is climate neutrality for the Commission? First of all, we did a study a long time ago with the DG Klima and the colleagues of EMAS, and Mike, they put a lot of input in that from the EMAS to evaluate how we emit in order to be efficient in our resources and to focus on the best wins we can do. And then we decided to reduce by 60% the actual emissions we have compared to 2005, which is quite challenging and such, because we are always speaking about the 1990 year as a reference, but we didn't have that reference. So we are just speaking about 15 years instead of 30 years of span. With our calculation, that makes us an actual further reduction of 38% compared to 19 to 2030. For your explanation, we said we put 19 as a baseline because we are expanding, we are improving the EMAS year after year, and 19 was the best information we had on our carbon footprint for all the locations, all the sites prior to COVID. COVID came and then everything became very strange in terms of data. And then for us, 19 was the perfect baseline. So, and when we will finish in 2030, if we have succeeded to reduce by 60%, we will think to implement carbon removal for the non-avoidable emissions. But this is another question because it is not completely defined, and we are not just in progress of going to 2030. So this is something we will start to think and to launch at the end of the process. We will concentrate all our means in actual reductions instead of starting compensating and spending public money on that. So after that study and all what we did, we saw that one of the most important emitter was the building and the workplace. We have plenty of buildings, plenty of real estate installations in Brussels, but also Luxembourg. We have the joint research centers in 5 countries in Europe, etc., etc. So we have plenty of buildings emitting a lot of emissions from energy consumption, but also fixed assets and so on. So the first effort was to reduce the impact of our buildings, and we have decided at the Commission to make that in 2 ways. One way is to reduce the office space as such by 25% in Brussels, which is considerable reduction, and then also to try to move from old non-efficient buildings to good and modern and efficient buildings, which is in progress. Probably you have seen that the Commission is selling buildings and we are moving from one building to another. Each movement means an improvement in terms of performance. We go to much better buildings now. But it's not just moving, it's also about renovating buildings. We need to renovate the buildings we have. For instance, we have the Berlaymont, which is a very, I would say, historical building. We cannot live like that. And then in that building, we will make renovation. We will not change the building for another. So all that activities are managed by the infrastructure offices in Brussels, OIB, the infrastructure office in Luxembourg, but also the General Research Center in the research centers installations. They are also making greener and newer buildings. The second very, very important emitter in our carbon footprint is the mobility. You have the mobility, professional mobility, and then you have the commuting. I'll start by commuting because commuting is quite well known. People know they go to the office by car, by public transport, by bike, by foot, etc. So everybody knows that. But in terms of impact for us, is not the most relevant. We are making a lot of activities to reduce the green and commuting emissions, but the most impacting one is the missions we do for work. We take the planes in particular, and that is quite emitting. So the Commission decided to decrease the impact of the missions by reducing the emissions. We are now trying to implement and to adopt a guide to missions to implement some principles. I will explain that later. And in addition to speak about staff missions, the Commission is also doing a big effort in reducing expert travel missions because we were used to have a lot of experts in Brussels to analyze, to look into programs, and now we are reverting that to much more virtual approach, and then we are decreasing drastically the emissions from those experts coming to Brussels in the past. Another very important aspect, which is not as such probably the most known in terms of emission, but which is important to support the rest, is the digitalization. We were concentrating the servers in two major locations with three little exceptions. So in order to decrease the consumption from our IT activities, we are also working on the fixed assets. By that I mean the computers, the laptops we use, and all that. That's another very important aspect of our strategy. Then we are speaking about what we are doing in terms of emitter, but we need also to show that we are trying to implement what we say to the others to do. And it is particularly true for the Green Deal. And the questions concerning the circular economy, we are increasing the life cycle environmental approach, trying also to incorporate social approach in our tenders, and we encourage the offers to be green. It's a challenge because we are moving from fast in some aspects. We are also working on the ecosystems and biodiversity, and in particular, we have made a big effort in a city because we had programs for biodiversity in the research center. We are much more countryside, but in the city like Brussels, which is a very urban location, we were not I would say pioneer, but we are becoming pioneer. We have plenty of little projects here and there to install local spaces and to develop all that. And last but not least, we are also trying to implement fair, healthy, and sustainable food in our canteens and cafeterias, trying also to show us as sustainable and to favorize better short circuits and other aspects which can increase our environmental performance. Another very important aspect of the greening of the Commission is about staff participation, and this comes from the top to the bottom of the organization, and we try to make people engaging and participating in the system. We had made a climate pact campaign. We tried to make people working in a new ways of working, colleagues become ambassadors, and we are trying really to have a strong support from staff because we don't think that we can succeed in greening the institution without having the colleagues on board and the support of the whole commission staff. And there you will see later also that for us it's very, very important to have the leaders on board because we need that push from the management. It's not just a bottom-up initiative, it's a two-way initiative. And then at the end of the project, we could look into carbon removals. And in that, it's very important to focus on the fact that we want to avoid to spend money in non-solid and robust schemes. So we are waiting, impatiently waiting for the regulation on the carbon removals and the possible first projects we can use after the member states have launched the schemes on carbon removals. We would like to spend the money where we are sure that we are really decreasing the carbon impact. And then now we are working on a project which is we call that the progress review. We adopted this legislation in 22, and by end 25 we will steer a little bit the actions and the targets, taking into account the progress we have done between 22 and 24 and 25. So that is for the policy. Now I will speak about the tool because we cannot make a policy if we don't have a robust and solid tool to feed the thoughts of the management and the president in this case and the commissioners. And the EMAS is the perfect tool to do that because it is a very strong management system, very demanding one, but at the same time is very robust and well equipped to support all that policies. Why we chose EMAS? EMAS, it is because, first of all, it is the regulation of the Commission based on ISO 14001, but it is much more. And we started that before deciding to become climate neutral. Thanks to that, we have a past history of the impact. And today, we launched that to decrease the environmental impact. And today we are speaking about around 40,000 people. We say 100 buildings, but it is more. 12 sites in 11 countries. And it is a tool for efficiency. We have seen that during the long time we are implementing the EMAS, that it is helping our efficiency very seriously. And then we want to lead by example, but this is not new, I guess, for all of us. We are requested to show the good example where possible. At the Commission, we are a very, very big organization, and it's very difficult sometimes to steer on that. And then it was decided to have an EMAS steering committee composed of 16 director generals and head of services, which meet twice a year to steer the process, to take decisions, to inspire. And this is very important. We need them to push the process. And we have a central coordination team, historically based in DGHR. It is like that, but we have 5 persons working on that all the time. But 5 persons to steer the whole process is not enough. And then we have site coordinators. We have a site coordinator for Brussels, for Luxembourg, for ISPA in Italy, Seville in Spain, Petten in the Netherlands. And we have also what we call EMAS correspondents, that are the people in the DGs. We allow us to have the two-way dialogue between our little central team and all the directorates general and services at the Commission. This is a heavy communication process, but at the same time, it's very fruitful because we have plenty of feedback and plenty of initiatives coming from the DGs, services, and the people. And at the same time, we can mix that with the steering of the board. So what is EMAS? EMAS is a management system based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act. But before going into that annual cycle, entering into the system, we need to know what we are. So when you see in the slide point 1 and 2, before going into that, you need to make an evaluation, to make an initial environmental review, composed about 4 elements. One is the legal compliance. We need to know what are the legislation that we have to respect. We have to know how we impact the environment, in what context we work, and what are the interested parties, the stakeholders with which we interact. So when we have that beautiful picture, at one moment in time, we will launch a policy and we will launch a program, and then we go into the cycle, Plan, Do, Check, Act, including internal audit. What is very, very different from ISO 40001 and the EMAS is that you have the external process. In the EMAS, it's obligatory to make an environmental report. We call that an annual environmental statement. We publish that every year. And these documents, but also the system, is verified by an accredited auditor, which comes to our installations. They look what we do, what procedures we have, but they look also into the results, how we build the results. And then if he's happy with our work, he delivers us a certificate of verification. But with that, he's not finished, because we have to go to the competent body to ask for a registration certificate. The competent body has the obligation to check whether we are seen as compliant in the countries in which we apply for registration. For instance, at the Commission, we have the Brussels competent body as lead competent body, but when we ask for a registration, the Brussels competent body contact the others in Europe. I would say, for instance, Lombardia, Italia. I can also say Germany for the Karlsruhe Center. And then those competent bodies reply if they agree on all registration, provided we don't have fines or we don't have problems. Always speaking environmentally on environmental aspects. What are the benefits of having the EMAS? The benefits is that it's a strong management system, which for a manager is very good because it's also a strong internal control. You are counting, you are evaluating, you are having audits, you are managing continuous improvement, and so it's quite strong for a manager. It's also about question of culture. Uh, Environment is not something outside of work. With the EMAS, you need to embed the environment in the regular activity. If you don't do that, probably it will not work properly. It's also a very important aspect to the visibility of the organization internally for staff, but also externally. So having the EMAS, having a statement, being transparent, allow us to be credible and is good for the institution as such. At least we hope. But it's also a question of having a good environmental impact. I said that at the beginning, but I want to repeat that here because we are obliged by the EMAS to make a continuous improvement. We cannot be happy with the situation we have today. We need to set targets and we need to demonstrate such improvement. One important aspect also for managers and deciders is the financial savings, because via the EMAS, and in particular at the beginning, you have big savings. When you start to refit buildings, when you start to look into the transportation you do, you reduce travels or things like that, you start to win or to save a lot of money. It's less obvious in the continuous improvement because the more you advance, the less the improvements are low-hanging fruits and easy to do. But at the same time, we still have savings today after nearly 20 years of the implementation of the EMAS. And one important aspect that's come after that also is the attractivity of the organization. At the Commission, we have made a new HR strategy, and clearly the Commission decided to embed the environmental aspect in the attractiveness of the Commission and the HR strategy to show that we are a modern and sustainable employer. And I think that most of you know that today environmental questions are on the top, on the concern of plenty of people, in particular those people, young people. And so I think I don't need to convince a lot of people today. It was not true 20, 30 years ago. This is a very big slide. I hope you will not disagree that I will not go in all the bullets because that could be a nightmare. That are a list of actions we have done under the greening communication target. The one perhaps I would like to insist a little bit is the bullet at the top right of the screen in greening the real estate park, and in Brussels in particular, because we have sold 23 buildings in Brussels, and we are working on the new buildings. You see here the buildings in which we are today, the L107 and the three others. There are new buildings, nearly passive ones, quite efficient, and this is to illustrate what I said before. Another important aspect is that we are changing the methodology of working. Instead of having individual offices, we are now passing the colleagues progressively to dynamic collaborative space. We have passed 8,000 people to that kind of new ways of working. It worked quite well in terms of system is quite good for the teams, for the communication, and that with the teleworking increase works quite well. Um, we had some resistance at the beginning because it's always like that when we change the habits, but progressively people is used to that, and we don't see such resistance today. Another important aspect, I don't know if you are located in cities or not, but in the city it's possible to work on biodiversity. We have had we have made a study with the University of Liège, Faculté de Chamblot, to the project for Brussels, and we are implementing projects one after the other because it costs. And then, for instance, you see that we have done a project in Béliard, B28, and in another building called Orban. Yeah, for those who know Brussels. And we are working, and we have adopted a new green commuting policy to support people to use soft means to come to the office. And the novelty of the new green commuting policy is that we have introduced an incentive for cyclists, which did not exist before the new document. For the future, we have other targets and other actions to do. We would like to approve the guide to emissions, in which we will set some the provisions to decrease the emissions of our travels. We will have the first Brussels zero emission building in use soon, I hope. We are still continuing installing photovoltaic installations in Brussels, but also outside Brussels, because we have one building outside Brussels which is quite big and with a very positive project ongoing. We are working on the corporate fleet. We are working on communication. One important thing is about staff participation, and we are working on the climate risk. Perhaps some of you know that is a card game on climate, and we use that for team buildings in units and directorates, and it works very well. We tested that in our own unit 2 years ago from now, I think. Yes, 2 years. And now it's expanding seriously in the Commission because it's a very good tool for managers, not just for the environment and the climate, which is very important, but also for the team building and the process in the working space. Okay, that's more or less the information I wanted to pass you. But all that actions, all that activity needs to lead to some results. And then I think that if Mike could take over for the 2-3 slides, it could be great if he can explain a little bit how we improve the performance of the Commission.
So I think you can see the graph now, if I'm not mistaken. We were talking in the past about how we were able to have control. We get information, we get it checked. And what you can see in this graph is the data for some parameters. Now, Celso mentioned EMAS is our system that we use. And there are certain parameters that are kind of like the basic core parameters that you measure under EMAS. They're requested in the annex of the regulations. So whatever you do in terms of your management system, you pretty much can't get away from these ones. So what we've done here in this graph is just show you how these particular parameters have progressed since 2015. I should just say that when EMAS started, it was implemented a little bit in Brussels and then also in Luxembourg, and the coverage increased over time from a first registration in 2005 until about 2014. We had the 8 main sites in Europe all covered. So we were able to report really as the Commission from 2014. I guess we've got data from 2015 here because it's a little bit more, the first year you do something is maybe not the best. So 2015 was a year of having data. So that takes the data for all of the sites and shows that for Brussels, Luxembourg, the JRC research centers in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Spain, and also one site in Ireland, you can see that we progressed very nicely over time. Particularly office paper is the one parameter that really has gone down an awful lot. It is something we're quite proud of. I think we've gone down by about 60, well, over just over, well, pretty much nearly 80% since 2015 in that data there. And all of the other parameters, we're down to about 40 to 60% of what we were in 2015, if you take 2015 value to be 100. So that one graph, I think, is quite good encouragement. You can see that a lot of the parameters dropped quite a lot during COVID, 2019 to 2020. We're seeing in some parameters a bit of a pickup, but because Celso has mentioned other policies such as moving to newer buildings, a bit more teleworking, so people not quite as present as much, and more limited working space, our parameters are still on a downward trend. So if I could ask for the next slide. I don't know, thanks, Celso, or whoever's organizing the slides, but if you look at the top left-hand corner, you see really what is the crux of progress under the greening communication objective. Celso mentioned from 2005 to 2030, we have a reduction target of 60%. And he also mentioned that it works out as 38% from 2019. Why 2019, you may ask? Well, that happened to be the time we were started to work on the communication, but also, where's it gone? Also, there we go. When we started to work on the communication, but also it's quite conveniently the last normal year, I guess you could say. And also on top of that, we were receiving much better advice on what to include on our carbon footprint. So it became much more complete in 2019. So we've used 2019 very much as a kind of a baseline, a recent baseline. So whenever we do any changes or there are some methodological suggestions that we have to take into account, we usually we make sure that we go back to 2019 and do everything the same way to 2019 so that we're consistent. So what you can see here are the many different categories that are in our carbon footprint. You can see in 2019 that we had a very big reduction in the beginning of COVID, and we're sort of going back up a little bit. But if you look at the different categories at the bottom, the dark blue colors, you can see that staff commuting really went down an awful lot from 2019 to 2020, stayed low in 2021 and went up a bit in 2022. And the same thing happened for missions, for staff missions. It really crashed in 2020, and 2021 as well was also very low, but 2022 was quite a rebound. So you see that really COVID hit travel a lot. You see also in the green bar there, the experts missions, which were quite high in 2019, almost as high as our own missions. They crashed in 2020 and 2021, and they've recovered, but they're still managed quite actively so that they don't generate too much of a proportion of our carbon footprint. One of the interesting things to note is the yellow, which is the gas consumption for the buildings. It didn't go down so much in 2020 and 2021 because although people were at home with COVID, the buildings were by and large open, so they still had to be ventilated, they still had to be heated. And in fact, because of COVID, the ventilation requirements were higher. So if anything, there was a pressure on to actually consume more energy, but somehow our emissions remained relatively stable in that period. But you can see in 2022, the yellow part is really quite reduced. There's a lot of actions that Celso alluded to in the previous slides, where there are actions to, as I said, move to newer buildings, use what we call dynamic collaborative space, where we have basically a more open plan and more flexible areas where you have quiet rooms if you need to work quietly, but generally you're sitting on a floor with other people, plus you have meeting rooms. But all these things mean that we use less gas, we have less square meters. The shades of grey there are basically related to our carbon footprint associated with our buildings and our IT, what we might call our embodied energy. So we don't just take into account our emissions from what we're burning for fuel at the moment. We're also looking at the emissions that were generated when our buildings were created and when our information technology equipment was created and so on. And there are some other categories there that we have for completeness. But basically, a lot of the work we do and a lot of the energy we have that we put into the system is around keeping this data up to date, because there's many categories there, and each of those categories can have many subcategories. And we have 8 sites, plus Celso mentioned, 12 sites in 11 countries. I mentioned the 8 main sites, the ones I listed earlier, but the DG Com is putting in the representations, or including one by one the representations of the European Union of the Commission and member states. So one by one, we're adding many more sites. So that's why it's growing. But so we have lots of categories there. And for example, building fixed assets IT, there's 17 different categories of IT that are taken into account there. For food, there's many different food types, not all of them, but quite a few. So it's quite a business. The second graph on the bottom right-hand corner is really a breakdown, just showing proportionally what it was in 2022. If you look at the right-hand side of the pie, you can see that buildings, energy, and refrigerant losses, along with buildings fixed assets, in other words, the embodied energy, that's altogether about half of the carbon footprint in 2022. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, the green and purple slice, that's missions and missions of staff and missions of experts on the administrative budget. That's about a quarter. And so those really are the dominant things. Staff commuting takes it over a quarter. So really, between the buildings and mobility, you've got most of the emissions. Next slide, please. We spend a lot of time looking at carbon. Well, initially, a lot of time thinking about teleworking. It was much discussed. How were we going to take into account teleworking in our carbon footprint? We looked at different approaches, but essentially we settled on one that seemed to make sense, in which we basically estimate we found out from surveys what is the size of the typical working area of a person when they're teleworking. We look at what the energy is needed to heat that area through the winter on a typical teleworking day. We look at the energy mixes in the different countries where people are working, and so we come up essentially with a footprint that's based on these parameters that gives you an indication of how much energy is used for heating when you're teleworking. And then we also took into account, for example, the electrical usage when you're at home. So you use your computer, you have a screen, you probably have a router, but from time to time in the day you may use a coffee machine, a toaster, various gadgets. So again, through surveys, we asked people what are the equipment that they typically use during the day when they're teleworking. And for each of those, we had an assumed amount of usage and an assumed amount of power consumption. So you could estimate pretty much what the emissions were associated with using various bits of kit that are plugged into the electricity. So with the heating and the electricity, you have over 3/4 of what we estimated to be the teleworking emissions. The other components there were video conferencing is really to take into account all of the time you're spending when you're on video calls, and it might not necessarily be the server of the commission in Brussels, in Luxembourg, but it could be in the server out there in the cloud somewhere. That was based on an assumption there's data available on how many hours people spend on video conferencing, so that was used for that. For fixed assets, it was then again a question of looking at what equipment you use at home and what emissions are generated when they are constructed. We also looked at what emissions were generated from using paper and also the waste, but we don't look at those specifically so closely anymore. But essentially, what we came up with the story was that our emissions that we estimated from teleworking were generally not quite as much as the savings we made from reduced commuting. There was a lot of interest, people wanting to know or to use teleworking as an excuse to either encourage everyone to go at home or encourage them not to go home, depending on which side of the argument you were. But essentially, our numbers showed that for most of our sites, particularly where a lot of people come by car, the savings you get from people staying at home by not generating emissions through commuting was quite a bit greater than what we estimated were generated at home. In places like Brussels, where you have many more people coming by car, by bike, by foot, by public transport, the difference was not so great, but it was still the case that the teleworking emissions were slightly less. So I think we dealt with that in a fairly open way. We talked to DG Klima, we got some feedback from them, and it was very useful. So I think the second part of that graph, which I can't see anymore, I don't know whether you can, seems to have gone walkies. That just shows The graph to the right shows shows just the evolution of the emissions over time since 2018. I don't know if it's coming back, but essentially we had teleworking before COVID came along. So it was no surprise that, well, our graphs show a big increase. So I think that was what I wanted to say. Celso, did you want to take things back now? Hello?
I have unmuted Celso.
You got one and you
You,
lost the other one. Yeah.
you should be able to speak now, but
Celso?
I think he has trouble with Zoom on his side. So
Okay.
And now, do you hear me?
yes,
Yes.
Okay, nice. It's terrible. I'm used to Teams and other systems, but Zoom for me is quite interesting. It's a learning curve. Sorry for the colleagues
sorry.
listening. Do you see the presentation?
No,
Hello?
we can't see for the moment.
And
No,
now?
it's good. Yeah,
And what page do you see?
I think it's the first one.
Okay, it is really curious. Okay. Do you see the slide called Role of Managers?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay,
it's better.
sorry for the mishmash.
Thank you. No problem.
Um, in fact, now the rest of the presentation, and I will try to make it quite shorter because you had a lot of information in a nutshell. It's a presentation we do usually for our managers because we consider that, in particular, head of units are very important people who can manage and steer and implement the process. So we have identified 6 areas in which a head of unit or manager can help to green the commission. One is leading by example, then awareness raising, greening missions, greening housekeeping, greener housekeeping, sorry for pronunciation, greener meetings and events, and buying green. Leading by example. Uh, Managers are essentials to support the system and the greening of the commission. I spoke about the top management with the management reviews, the boards we do twice a year, but middle manager are also essential in implementing that because we are not just speaking about the top managers, but to the whole line of commands that should follow the, the the trend and to implement it at the end of the day. It's about resources question also, and then head of units are essential. We think that head of units could act as a role model when a head of unit showed a good example. It is always good in terms of greening, and but not just that. They can also inspire people. They are working with people. It's a question of people management, and for most of them, they can push in the good direction to have good results and to have improvements. Awareness raising is essential. Uh, People, staff need to know a little bit about what is happening. So the 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 commission is used to have unit meetings in which we speak about the work, the targets, the deliverables we have to provide. But at the same time, in that unit meetings, in that discussions, we can also have sometimes a greening discussion. Not all the time, because we want not to bore people, but we can explain what is happening in the commission. They can update the colleagues about the novelties, for instance, in terms of missions, instead for events. I will come to that. And this is very good because it's not just explaining to people, but it's also to open the discussion and dialogue and to have feedback and to have also initiatives people can come with ideas, and they have plenty of ideas most of the time. So we can take benefit of that and to build projects from that. And this is a good occasion when we are discussing in the unit or in the directorate meeting to think about what we can do, what kind of initiative we can do in the unit. And often we have ideas, and surprisingly, people find that quite well and quite good, and then are quite happy to participate in that kind of initiative. One aspect I would like to speak about is the climate risk workshop. I evoked that before, but it is very interesting because we did that in the unit as a guinea pig. We tried to do that in the team building, and it was very impressive the manner of the staff of the unit participate in the game. It was not just about climate, but also about interaction between people, characters, discussions, etc. Very, very, very interesting as team building tool. I have put the link to the climate fresh organization. We use the accounts and the game from them. We are training facilitators, and now there are several people that can make team buildings at the commission on demand. So that's a quite interesting tool. Another important aspect, I don't know, but for you, but for us, is the manner we travel, and we are trying to making adopt the guide to missions by end of this year, maybe early next year. But the idea is that we have to move from the idea that we have to travel all the time, it's normal, etc. We need to justify a mission. It's not just nice to have; it's a need to have. Um, so the idea is also to avoid recurrent in-person meetings when they are not needed. We know that we have to network perfectly, but at one moment in time, maybe we have too much travel, too much meeting in person when they are not necessary. Another aspect also is to limit the number of staff traveling to the same event. We try to travel to make a mission alone when it's possible, instead of having plenty of colleagues around us when we're not needed. It's not a joke. Sometimes we said a very, very big representation to some events. Also, in the same vein, the series of missions, but also another important aspect is that we try to promote traveling by train, and we are giving a limit we consider reasonable to go by train is 550 kilometers one way. Now with the speed trains, it's quite easy to do that, and often the train is sometimes quicker than the plane because you have to wait in the airport and travel from the airport to the city, etc. So from some locations, train is more advantageous. There are also now a new trend is the overnight trains. So that can save hotels nights, and is also a good manner to travel. Um, Budget is an important aspect of traveling, and to make that possible, the commission decided to leave the idea that you have to have a cheaper travel, and we consider that if we have a green alternative, we can perhaps go up to 30% more expensive travels. It's an indication. We don't say that that like a limit. It's an indication to the deciders that we can pay more for a more greener travel. Of course, we should favor the red flights, which sometimes is more expensive. It happens. And when we travel, also we suggest to prefer premium economy to business class, because premium economy is much more less impacting in terms of emission in all the calculations we are doing. The other aspect we suggest managers to put on the table with their teams is the green housekeeping. Simple things we do every day, but it is always good to speak about that. Switch off your appliances, switch off the light. Um, it becomes more and more a habit, but not as a way. It's always good to recall that kind of thing, little things. We also ask people to use green office supplies. In our catalog, we have green supplies, very well labeled, and then we suggest to buy that green supplies instead of more polluting ones. When we make a meeting, when we make a little reception, an event, it is good to have cutlery, crockery on board instead of using single-use items, plastic cups and things like that, which go directly to the bin at the end of the event. We are promoting to print less, but for us, it's becoming more and more easy because we are digitalizing a lot of our practices. It's also a good moment to speak about commuting, teleworking habits, and again, it's an open dialogue. It's not just preaching; it's just discussing. Um, it's also sometimes good to speak about waste. And the good manner of sorting, because we see all the time in internal or external audits that in the bins you don't find always the good waste, and it's curious because we are speaking a lot of that, a lot of advertising of that, but people still putting wrong waste in the bins. And then also another aspect is to think second life for material, IT, supplies, furniture. It's good to think about that because we can do that. At the commission, for instance, we try to do a systematic second life to all the laptops, to all furniture. We are making new furniture with old one, and it's just a manner to implement the life cycle approach. Another aspect which is important for us is that we have a lot of meetings, a lot of events, and the Commission has developed a guide on the sustainable events. And you have here the principles of that guide. I will not go through that principles because I think that is quite a common approach. What one important thing we try to promote is the to use a green venue, not just because they have a good environmental performance, but also because of the location with a good public transport and all that aspect. But again, I think that all that common sense aspects are well known. The fact that we have done a user guide help people to have a checklist to see whether that kind of information is well meet when we make an event or a meeting. Buying green, I think that everybody is buying, so goods and services, and we are using green criteria in the tenders. And most of the time we try also to include social criteria. For that, we have several tools. We have the green procurement tools developed by Digital Environment. You have the link here to that tools, and they are quite interesting to know before buying something because you have criteria to propose for the tender procedures. And then you have also GPP, Green Procurement, Public Procurement Help Desk for the union. One can contact if we have questions on how to buy goods and services. That's also a quite interesting aspect to discuss when we are working in a day-to-day life. If I would like to cut the presentation now, I would like to end by a little conclusion, and it is that greening is not just about data, about good behavior. It's about that, of course, but what we need to green an organization is a very strong political commitment and a good leadership. We need that the managers decide on that and push the process. Without that, it's difficult to succeed to have a full green organization. And then to support that, to support deciders, to support the management, we need a robust environmental management system. We need to work on data, on figure. If not, we cannot support and we don't have evidences about what we are doing and what we should do. So that would be my conclusion today. Perhaps I will have another discussion, another conclusion after the discussion we may have after this presentation. But I would not like to finish the presentation without saying that we can reply to questions. We are accessible via the mailbox we have, the EMAS mailbox. And then you have also a link to the environmental statement in which you will find all the data, all the figures relating to the commission. And then you have also the EMAS pages link if you are interested in the EMAS management system that are the link to the digital environment EMAS pages. And there you will find the Commission as an institution, but also the others. You will find the Parliament, the Council, the Investment Bank, the Central Bank, because we are now more than 15 or 20 organizations, organizations, we are EMAS registered. That's all for today, and thank you for your presence.
Thank you, Celso. Thank you, Michael, for this very interesting presentation. Of course, we will share the support of the presentation. And now, if you have any question to Celso or Michael about the presentation, please let's ask them. You can raise your hand in the chat. There is one hand raised, but I think it was from the beginning. It was Lola, but I'm not sure if Donatien, please. I'll let you the floor.
This is Donatien from the French-speaking agency. I was looking at the fact that you have tools like green public procurement tools, and there is a link. Is it accessible for us, national agencies, or is it an internal tool?
No, the tool is accessible to everybody in the union. It's in the website of the digital environment. So any organization, agency can have it. It's not limited in terms of access.
Okay, thank you.
You can also ask the questions on the chat if you want. I will read it if you need. So, okay, so it's asked to share the links here in the chat. I'll take it from the PowerPoint. I hope it will work. Okay, so there is another question. So it's, could you elaborate on the social criteria used in the green procurement, please?
Yes. In fact, we with different criteria. I'm not a specialist of the procurement, first of all, but what I know is that, for instance, in Brussels, when we have both furniture, we have put a special criteria on the children work on the slave approach, in particular for textiles. Because we know that in some furniture you have very cheap textiles coming from different sources. You have also sometimes also criteria on sustainable fisheries, sustainable agriculture, but not just in terms of greening, but also in terms of social projects and approaches. I don't have the details on that. Sorry for this reply, which is quite vague, but I have seen that kind of provision in some tenders. Yeah.
Thank you. There is another question from Vincent. It's what is for you a good carbon offsetting policy?
Ah, that is the question. Vincent, I think you are French. Ça, c'est la question en franc. Hein?
So,
No, that's a very, very good question. In fact, this is the question why this is why we don't make offsetting at the Commission today. It is because we have seen very nice schemes appearing and becoming greenwashing schemes after some inquiry or something like that. And then today, what we are trying to implement at the Commission is carbon removals approach, and in particular permanent carbon removals via the industry or the kind of tools like the construction of buildings. The problem is that those projects and programs are not yet very developed and controlled. By that I mean that we need to have some rules to ensure that the projects they put on the market are reliable and secure. And from my last understanding, there is a regulation which will be published, I think, soon, next year in 25, something like that, implementing carbon removals requirements from member states. And then member states should launch the schemes at their level, and maybe, hopefully, we will have carbon removal projects ready to use by 27, 28. But it is a kind of wish, if you want. I don't have the date, the definite date, because it's a very, very difficult project on which DG Klima is working constantly with a lot of group of experts, and we are waiting that because in the past we have seen schemes, even schemes that don't exist, and companies are paying for that. If you want to do something, you perhaps should check what are the controls and the standards they have. Some projects have the gold standard label, which is a kind of control. I guess that most of the projects are well controlled, but you are not safe 100% because there is a very huge market with a lot of interveners, and sometimes you may have surprises. Yeah. So
thank you.
I cannot tell you that everybody speak about planting trees. Yeah, it's nice, but if you plant a tree and then the next year the tree burns or something like that, we cannot say that it's a permanent project. It's a little bit difficult to promote that kind of project, but it's good to do that. I'm not saying that it's not good to do that, but if you want to be safe, maybe you should do like us, to wait that the EU policy, the EU legislation have its effects, and then perhaps we will have secure schemes.
Thank you. So there is another question from Jeremy. How do you see EMAS being used by national Erasmus Plus and ESC national agencies? Is it an intensive process in terms of human and financial resources?
Yes. EMAS is not for free. EMAS need effort. Financial effort could be limited a little bit, but definitely you need human resources, human resource effort, because it's a system. You need to implement it, you need to document it, and at the beginning, in particular, we need to put the means on the table. What it is true that once you have done 1 year or 2 years of the EMAS, the rest should become a habit, and the cost become lesser. Still, that you need to make the external verification. You have to pay for an auditor to come to audit your organization. That is a cost, and you could also take into account the cost of the staff you use for the EMAS. We are doing that on the Commission. We are in the statement. You will find some information on the costs, and the cost cover the human resource allocated to the EMAS, and also the central contact we have for internal and external audits, since we are externalizing all these audits because of the specialized approach. So it's an effort, definitely, but we have to be conscious that in front of the effort, you will have savings. And as I have said at the beginning, the savings should be great. If you are not implementing a system, if you are not doing an effort in greening your institution or organization, the first saving are high because you start from nothing. But if you come from a very, 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 very performant building, which is already passive, the savings are less. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that when you have make a saving, the next year you forget the saving because you consider that it is already there, but it's not true. If you stop the system little by little, you will lose the possibility to keep or to maintain the savings because you don't manage the system, you don't review all that, and then at one moment in time, instead of savings, you will have losses.
Could I just add that if your agency or your organization is maybe based in one place, one building, or a cluster of buildings very close together, centrally managed, it's probably a lot easier than if you're like us, sprawled out with lots of sites all over the place, lots of different directorates, different management structures. Because then, most, at least in terms of the information you need to gather, it will be there quite easily for you to get. Whereas we really have to scramble and really try to get to the bottom in the furthest reaching parts of different structures. So we have a complexity which probably nobody else does so far that we've seen, which means we have quite a big team to deal with that. But if you're basically just in one or two buildings in one place, I think it could be relatively simple.
Yeah.
I mean, it still costs you something. You still need to make the effort, but it would be much more straightforward.
Yeah. One aspect that can perhaps help you to understand better, there are not only big companies making the EMAS, you have also small and medium companies making and implementing the EMAS. So that means that it is sustainable.
Thank you. There is also a question by Jenny. How far upstream do you go in your data collection for carbon footprint? For example, would you include the data center emissions if opting for more digital practices, digital archiving instead of paper archive maybe? Or where would you draw the line?
Good question. That's for Mike.
Well, for now, we draw the line. We include the energy used by our data centers, the commission data centers. I mentioned when we do teleworking that we did include a little bit of carbon footprint from the use of teleworking, basically to allow for servers that are out there in the cloud that are not controlled by us. So it's maybe something we'll have to expand on a little bit more. But generally speaking, as I mentioned, with the embodied energy for computers, for buildings, we're not just looking at the energy use of ourselves. We're looking basically upstream emissions, what they call well-to-tank emissions. So, for example, when we use fuel in our vehicles or when we calculate emissions from aircraft, we include also the emissions that you need to get or to get the fuel to the point of use. So, okay, you fly a plane, the plane burns fuel and you get emissions. But to get the fuel to where, out the ground, transported, refined, and into the plane, that's also energy and emissions. So we do take that into account. So it's, I think we have, because of that, fairly conservative emissions calculations, at least for transport. But yeah, I've read some a bit worrying things about data centers and how their emissions are somewhat understated. And one of the criticisms I've heard is that a lot of these companies are private companies, and it's quite hard to follow up on their green claims, should we say, to get the data. But it's something we'll have to look a lot more at. Yeah, a good question.
Thank you. So you will also soon publish the guide to mission, as I understood. Will it be shareable or?
For the moment, it is not shared outside the institutions. We have shared that with the other European institutions because we collaborate with them as an information tool. But once it is adopted, that document will become public. I don't know to what extent and how how external people will have access to it, but there is nothing to hide there. As, the administrative provisions and yes, but I guess that before the first quarter next year, it will not be available for other than European institutions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is there any more questions in the chat? You can raise your hand if you want. No, I think we're done now. So yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was very rich and useful, I think, for our colleagues trying to implement the new green strategy. It's a big challenge we have now at the Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps national agencies. So I hope it has been useful for you colleagues to have these insights and to have this information also to help you promoting the green transition to your national agencies. Thank you, Celso. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
So you're welcome.
So the webinar will be is registered and we will share it after, and also we will share soon some one-pagers that will help you on topics such as the procurements, but first it will be on transport, so it will help you with some resources and tools on how to go green on transport for the missions and for the commuting also in your national agencies. So it will be published by during the next week. Thanks a lot.